we tend to do all the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
And we kind of equate that to our relationship with the Lord. I opened my Bible and I found a passage to be able to, transition from song to song.
Yeah.
And I treat that to like, there's my Bible time. And it's like, we've got to be careful that we're not turning that into my entire relationship, because then I'm dry.
Hey, I'm Andrea Olson. I've been leading worship and training worship leaders for nearly 20 years, and my mission is to support worship leaders just like you in volunteer-supported ministries, because I know what it's like. I've been there. It's amazing, but you have a big job, and sometimes you might feel a little bit alone. But I'm here to remind you that you aren't. We'll cover spiritual and leadership growth, practical resources, and get encouragement from other worship leaders from all over the world. I truly want to see you lead from the overflow, not the overwhelm. So grab a cup of tea or coffee and join me. Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. Well, today we have a guest on the podcast that I have been wanting to connect with for a while. I'm really excited for this conversation. We've connected a little bit back and forth on Instagram, and he's doing some really amazing things for the church, for worship leaders. And so I'm excited to welcome Ryan Loche from the Church Collective. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be able to chat.
Absolutely. So would you take just a couple of minutes and tell all of our listeners a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. So I have spent about 25 years in worship ministry. Started as an intern and kind of did the intern thing and worked my way up in the same church, which was an amazing blessing. But for about 20 years, I was at the same church, started as an intern, ended up being the executive experience and worship pastor. Basically, I oversaw everything except for kids ministry, which was awesome. In the middle of all that, my heart's always been to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So about 10 years ago, we were starting to put together little video training resources, blog posts and stuff for our church. Had the idea, maybe there's other worship pastors that would want to do that. So kind of opened up the Church Collective as a nonprofit that we've just kind of utilized as an opportunity to connect with others, to help other worship leaders, to build resources for that. Done conferences kind of all over the place and online resources. And lately, you've probably, if you know the name, you've probably seen us through some memes and stuff on Instagram, but we try to do our best to have some fun, but also do some training in there. About 4 or 5 years ago, was really feeling kind of like, Lord, what do you want to do with me? What do you want me to do with the elder season of like ministry, and really thought that I should jump into continuing education. I've been a big fan of learning, had a master's in theology, and then decided to jump in for the Ph.D. of worship 4 years ago from Liberty University. Awesome program if you're looking for training. Liberty's awesome.
Wow.
But yeah, started the PhD in there. I had been an adjunct guitar instructor for Southeastern University and, various colleges and stuff like that. So now I've kind of settled into a professor, and I do the Church Collective, and I do some consulting and training and really just kind of do my best to be a resource for the church.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, it sounds like you are not bored.
Right. I've got friends that say I'm in my tri-vocational stage, which I'll try anything and I'll do, 14 different jobs at a time.
That's amazing. But it seems to me, just from the little bit that you shared, that you love it and you have a passion for it. And so what would you say along the way has maybe sparked, but then also fueled that passion to keep going? Because you're not slowing down, right? You're continuing to grow and to pour into people. And so along the way, what's fueled that?
I mean, a lot of it has to do with the spark that you see in a student's eyes, especially, or I was just having coffee with a young guy yesterday that's just starting to jump into worship and creative and youth ministry and all that. And the wonder that there can be when you're getting into ministry, but then also, I'm 43, so being at my age, knowing some of the wounds that can come from doing church, I want to do my very best to be able to help those that I'm connecting with, have their eyes wide open on what they're doing, be a part of the change. What's really exciting for me is as I teach worship classes and things like that, is hearing the students. They're just so excited for what's to come. And if you ask any of them, something that I say often is I can't wait to see what your worship ministries look like here 5 or 10 years from now, because they're coming at it in a very awesome and authentic place. I think even different than what I was doing 25 years ago when I was getting into ministry at their age. I think there's a purity to what they're trying to do. And I genuinely, as the researchers, the PhD in me wants to write about it or, study it and figure out what's going on. But I'm genuinely excited to see what the church, when these young people are running ministries, what it's going to look like. And I can't wait to see it.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. And what an incredible thing for you to be able to come alongside of these young leaders who, it would seem that there's a lot of, there's just a lot of pressure for them, right? Of well, you're the future generation. You're coming up. You better get it together.
Right.
And which I guess, don't we, we all have that pressure, that burden, but I would imagine they're just so encouraged and uplifted because there is a lot of pressure, but at the same time, it's they're amazing people, who have amazing hearts for the Lord and for the future of the church. And so, I would just imagine that that's a really amazing thing for them as students to have someone who believes in them.
Sure. Yeah. And as best as I can, all of us, you're listening to this, or watching, it's really important for us to give them opportunity because, like you said, they are the church of the future. I am excited to see what it is, but also there can be a certain amount of, they're doing the church now. And I think churches could really benefit from, even the young guy that I was having coffee with yesterday, the church will benefit from him coming and bringing his ideas and actually doing some leadership rather than, again, my history starting as an intern. I spent years as an intern and I really didn't have a voice. I was able to serve and, make incredible relationships that I still have with the young people that I was training in the various teams at the time, but I didn't have a voice for a long time in the church. And so if there's anything that I'm seeing now, it's some of these young people are getting a voice when they're getting on these church staffs. And I'm excited for that because they can do some incredible work today as well as in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have a lot of new worship leaders, newly positioned worship leaders in the Overflow Worship community. And what would you say from your perspective, because you're working with students, but you also probably carry relationship with them into their first jobs and into their, positions. What would you say is the most surprising thing that they tell you they experience in, the early days of whether it's an internship or being on staff?
Right. Honestly, to maybe even a little bit before they get on staff, one of the most surprising things for me was, I typically have if you're a worship major, I'll typically have you for 5 or 6 classes. And by the time we get to the end, we kind of get into here's the tactical ways you're going to find a job as a worship leader. And I kind of go down the ways I went through it, and there's websites and there's companies that will help you find jobs. And what was fascinating to me is of these, 15 or 20 students in the classroom, they were all shocked that there would even be a website to post your job for a job in a worship ministry. And for me, again, with my history, I was what? How do you expect to get a job? Of course there's, an Indeed or whatever for churches. Of course there's something like that. And there was a purity to, we had a great discussion about all of them were we're just going to, we're going to end up finding a church that resonates with us, and we're going to like the pastor and we're going to like the people, and we're just going to go serve there. And again, that's having, been through ministry as much as I have, the cynical side of me is well, that's not going to pay the bills, guys. You need to go get a job.
Yeah.
But I'm doing my very best to I don't want to crush that spirit because from just a spiritual standpoint, find those churches that you resonate with, find that pastor, find that community, and then let the Lord organically do what he needs to do. Ironically, that's kind of, as I started as an unpaid intern and then worked my way through, that's what happened with me. But again, it's hard to make that a prescriptive thing, but that's been the most surprising is as these young people are very, very, very cognizant of wanting to resonate with the church before they jump for the job. Whereas I think maybe my generation, wanted to, rightly so, support our family and make a career out of it. So I've got to find the job. And if there's a compromise to be made theologically, again, I was blessed to not have to do that. But I've talked with a lot of guys that, I'm not a big fan of this or that, but I need a job. So I'm going to go work at this church. And then, I'm sure you've seen it too. After a couple of years, that doesn't do real well for them. But yeah, I mean, that's probably the most surprising at the front end of it.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. And I love what you said about, not wanting to crush their spirit, because there is a purity in that. And then just
Right.
walking with them through it, though, and helping them see like, okay, no, this is how it is. And this is how you step into the next season of ministry. So one of the things that we do here at Overflow Worship is we help churches who are hiring new worship leaders, and we basically walk them through like a 1-year ministry onboarding program, like ministry rhythms, ministry life, but also like the practicalities of, being in ministry. Because I've seen that the church, it's not their fault. They just don't have time, right?
Sure.
To help somebody who's new, like kind of step into that. So having worked with so many students, what would you tell churches? Like, hey, you guys, you really need to do this. Like, what's lacking for these worship leaders when they step into these positions that we as church leaders can be like, oh, okay, we could do that. We could provide that for them, or we could support them in that way.
I mean, I think a lot of times by the time we get these hires at our churches, often the senior pastor, whoever's been kind of filling the gap, is just happy to have, like, they're just ecstatic to have that covered. So you see a certain amount of like, I've been holding all this, here you go. And then you kind of just drop it on them. Yeah. So I think like the first and foremost thing is relationship with whoever your direct report is, your senior pastor, if you can, but depending on the church, you might not, there might be layers above you where you don't get to go be, super chummy with the senior pastor, but whoever your direct reports are, speaking to the direct report, spend a lot of time with this person, spend a lot of time helping them out, spend a lot of time building a relationship with them, because you need that relational capital as stuff is going to begin to happen, because stuff will invariably happen. And what I often see is worship pastors will come in, they'll want to do big things, and they start doing these big things, and they start stepping on usually relational landmines, where there's a lot of preconceived notions from various members of the worship team, where they were expecting the leader to be something else, or expecting to do one thing, or they feel entitled to something. Or you may very well come in and you've got a volunteer who had been running the worship ministry for a couple months, and the leadership didn't really talk to that person about this transition, and all of a sudden somebody's in charge of them, and they're, they think you're an okay person, but they're, they were expecting something else. So I think all of that can be really helped by relational capital just being built up as the leader with the person, and then again over communicating with the rest of your team what's happening. Have a dinner with the worship team and introduce the person, and make sure that everybody understands you're backing them up and you're excited that they're there. Don't just put them in there and hope for the best, which again, I totally get it for those that are in charge. When you finally get that hire, it's hard to hire for the church. Like, it's not like, so usually it's been a wide open position for a long time, and you've probably been bearing the burden of that work as much as you can, with all kinds of jockeying for position from volunteers and other people, and you finally made that decision, and you have that person. I totally understand. Like, cool, I'm gonna go focus on what I'm supposed to be doing, and like, I'm gonna give it to this guy. So yeah, got to be real careful to not jump for that.
Before we get to the rest of today's episode, I wanted to tell you about what's going on at Overflow Worship for the rest of 2024. Now, this year has been amazing, but what I'm about to tell you, what we're about to do, is going to be the best part of the entire year. I guarantee it. But here's the deal. You're not going to be able to see what we're doing if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel. So make sure that you head over to YouTube at Overflow Worship Official and subscribe, because we are releasing some brand new things. And guys, what we're doing is something we have never done before. And honestly, nobody else is doing this. And why? Why are we doing this? Because I believe that God has called us at Overflow Worship for the rest of 2024 to focus on worship, prayer, and joy. Why? Because worship and prayer are our foundation, right? It's just the thing that brings us life, the thing that refuels us and refills us, right? But joy is something that we all need, especially in the times that we're facing right now. Joy is something that we all need. And so we are focusing on worship, prayer, and joy. And the opportunities that we're bringing to you and the things that we're releasing are all surrounding that. And so we are releasing something brand new on Thanksgiving Day, but you're not going to be able to watch it if you don't subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So make sure that you head on over there to Overflow Worship Official, or if you want to just DM us the word Christmas 24, you can do that as well on Instagram, and we'll send you the link. We have partnered with Brian Tabor from Worship Probs. We've partnered with Praise Charts. We've also partnered with Ali Lundeen, a Proverbs 31 girl on Instagram, all in order to bring you something really special. And we also want to invite you to join us for a time of Christmas worship. It's airing on November 27th at 7 p.m. Central on the Overflow Worship YouTube channel. And so I encourage you and challenge you to hop on over to YouTube, subscribe, and make sure that you don't miss what's coming, because it is going to be really fun, really incredible. And I pray that it is the biggest blessing to all of you. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such good wisdom, and it goes both ways, right? Like for the leadership coming in to focus on relationship and over communication, but then for the person coming in too, this worship leader coming in like, hey, I need to, invest in relationship and be mindful of what was here before me, and really honor that. And I think that's such a It seems like easy, but it's not. It's something we really have to pay attention to.
Yeah. We had a worship pastor on my team at one point, and awesome guy, but it was definitely like he was a little abrasive, young, and kind of brought like some high energy. We were a blended church, figuring out all that, so that's a whole fun thing to talk about. So just trying to figure out how to do the new stuff, because that's what we all want to do. And he's a young guy and he wanted to do all the new stuff, but the older generation wasn't a real big fan of him. So I was always very intentional to push him to like, go take these people out to coffee, go spend time with them. And that ends up bearing so much fruit as a worship leader. Yeah. What I often tell people and try to do myself as best I can, the more I know just the people in the church, the worship leading kind of becomes easy and almost secondary, like the song selection and like, did we do a hymn or was it too loud or all that. If they actually just know me as a person and they know that I actually know their name and care about them, they're a lot more gracious for whatever songs and like whatever might be happening on the stage, versus I'm just the guy up there. They have never talked to me. They feel like I have no time for them. So investing that time, not just the worship leader, but the whole worship team, like having that culture of being accessible and available and staying out of the green room or whatever, if we're going to go down that one. But like spending time with the church. Yeah.
I mean, some of the like the longest standing worship leaders that I know, like there's one guy in the Overflow community who's been at his church for like 25 years. And it's like, I know for a fact that he's out having coffee every week with people. He's hosting team nights. He, is connecting with the congregation, and he genuinely cares, and they know that, and there's just so much power in that. So good.
Yep. Yeah, it's people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the other challenges that I hear from people, and I've faced it too, is, it's this whole concept, and we talked about this a little before we hit record, of how do we bring our congregation along? How do we bring our people along in this journey of really understanding what worship is, and really understanding that it's more than a song. And, like even you just referenced, like this new guy wanted to do the new songs, and the older generation wants to, preserve their heritage. And how do we honor that? Yes. But I think the way we honor that requires people to understand, right, that it's more than just a song. And so how do you approach that with, the students you work with, the people you mentor? Like, how do we start that process and that conversation?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I ran into it. It was a big piece for why I ended up jumping into the PhD program. Was again in 2020 when the whole world shut down. My church was in the middle of California. So we shut down, and that was it. We didn't meet. And there was a number of people at my church who were really upset, saying, well, now I can't worship. And in the strictest sense, I understand where they're coming from. Yeah, like we shouldn't neglect. Hebrews tells us don't neglect the gathering. Like we need to get together. We need to like come together. But our church had made the decision that no, we're going to actually shut down for a while. We ended up opening up eventually. But like for me, I got what they were saying. But for them to say I can't worship was like, well, that's not what worship's about. Like
Yeah.
you can actually worship God. You have all the access to the Lord at home too. And that was for me. And I remember sitting down with my team and like, we've made a mistake. We have done a poor job discipling our church on what actually worship is and what we can do with it. Again, not neglecting the corporate gathering. There's something special about coming together and ministering to each other with songs, hymns, and spiritual songs. Like that's a very important thing. But to say that I can't worship because I'm not able to get that Sunday experience really opened up for us. Like we started, at the time it was making videos because we weren't gathering, but we were kind of putting a bunch of like training together, looking at Romans 12:1, where an act of obedience, where we give our whole lives to the Lord. That's our true worship. So we really did our best to try to define worship as much more. So that'd be the aspect is as you're worship leading at your churches, wherever you can find an opportunity to pepper in some of these passages where whatever you can do to help people understand that 20, 30 minutes that you're doing on the weekend, that's not the extent of worship, but that life, all of life is worship. Again, the more I learn about worship, the more I feel like I don't know about worship because it really is everything. And that can be kind of a cop-out to just like, well, worship's life. And you're like, okay, cool. What do I do with that?
Yeah.
What do I actually do? But I think just helping as best as we can disciple our churches in worship. And there's little kitschy things like, I don't know about your church, but my church for a time would say, we're going to, continue our worship now through the offering. Like, and we kind of would always use like language like that, which is good. It kind of feels cheesy as I say it, but like I get the heart is like we're trying to add a level of discipleship to our church to help them understand that the worship isn't just the singing. So just reiterating that as best as you can in your context for whatever that means at your church, like really figuring out, is it camping on Romans 12:1? Is it camping on various verses to really ingrain it into the church, or maybe it's giving them resources and just song suggestions throughout the week that they could use, a playlist or something like that, just something to pull away from just that weekend service. And then ironically, we always want real powerful worship services, but like the better we do at all this other stuff outside of the services, the better the services go. It's more about that than, again, we play excellently. We put our stuff together as best as we absolutely can, but really it's those relationships and discipleship outside of the rooms that helps the participation grow at our churches.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting as you were talking, I was just thinking, it dawned on me, we can have these wonderful worship experiences on Sundays. And if we don't help people across the bridge of how to do it throughout the week, I wonder if sometimes even subconsciously they're like, well, I'm not replicating Sunday morning in my living room. So I don't know. I've never really thought about it in that angle before.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a chunk of my dissertation was focused on online worship. And that was some of the participants I talked to would talk about how it felt weird, like watching a stream and then someone saying, everybody stand, clap your hand. Like, cause that's like, again, so a lot of what I found is mostly what we're doing for our online services doesn't actually translate super well for the people in the room. But like you said, it's a different experience to try to do it in your room. So again, you've got to find, again, worship is just so much. I keep saying again a lot because I feel like I'm referencing back to old stuff, but worship is just so much more than singing. And it's just, it's everything, as I said, but that's just it's a hard truth to try to grasp. And then as best as we can, we're trying to help our people get that, that they can live a life that they can be encouraging to their family. They can smile to someone out on the street, and in some way that's a level of worship because you're living out obedience to the Lord and you're sharing your faith, and that can be worship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an encouragement for all of us as leaders to, keep in mind that our stewardship of the atmosphere of worship in the church, it doesn't end after Sunday, right? Like we want to equip and empower people to continue to worship, whether it's through music or like you said, sometimes it's just as easy as stating like, hey, when you helped somebody pack their groceries in their car, that's living a life of worship. And so I think it's a good thought-provoking question for all of us to ask ourselves. Like, what am I doing to help empower my the people in this church outside of Sunday to continue a life of worship.
Yep. Yeah, it's great.
So, you talked about online worship experiences. And as you said, a lot of what we're doing in the room maybe doesn't translate. And I think that's an interesting piece of conversation for us to touch on for just a minute, because so many of the churches that we work with at Overflow, they are still streaming online, but they're a, church of 500 people or less. And so trying to translate everything that's happening in the room with all the technology that's needed and the skill and everything is difficult. So talk to us a little bit about some of the kind of main challenges that you've seen and the people that you've talked to, and then how we can, bridge that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. Excuse me. It's hard because, like, from the front end of it. So my dissertation's title was The Online Members' Experience of Pastoral Care Through Worship. And essentially what I did was I interviewed a lot of leaders, pastors, worship leaders, tech directors, and I interviewed a lot of just participants, like people that just go to church. And I compared is what the leaders are planning, like what they're thinking they're doing is what you're planning, translating to the participant. Are they experiencing it the way that you think you are? And short answer is no, they're not. But the hard part with it all is, I mean, we see people now, I can't remember the name of the church, but I just remember seeing there was a church that recently had a pretty big online presence and decided to stop streaming because they wanted people to be plugged into the local church. But also when you talk to, especially like you said, a church of about 500 or so, there's a certain amount of, you have to keep streaming if you want to be relevant online. If somebody's going to visit your church, almost every time, say 9 times out of 10, they're going to look at a few sermons on your website. Yeah. They're going to catch your live stream on YouTube or Facebook. So if you don't have that as a pastor, you're kind of feeling like I'm irrelevant. And tactically, you kind of are. Like there will almost always be somebody who might have potentially visited, but if they can't see your church services, they might just go look at some other ones and end up at some other church. And again, not that that's a hard and fast rule. There's going to bound to be people that are going to come to your church anyway. And again, like depending on how Calvinistic we want to get, like the Lord's going to bring who he's going to want to bring to your church anyway. Right. So if you want to live like that, great. But that's a hard balance. So what I ended up concluding was really kind of just like encouraging church leaders to genuinely wrestle with both passages of scripture, like Hebrews 10:24 says, "Don't neglect the gathering." During the COVID shutdown, there were some pastors that took that as like, I don't care if the government's going to tell me to close my doors. I'm just going to keep meeting. Like, and some took that to like, but as a pastor, like, okay, what does that passage mean to you? Yeah. And so if we're not to neglect the gathering, what was interesting is like I would talk to some of the pastors in the study, would talk about how they absolutely wanted everybody in the room, and that was the most like that is how you do church. And then it was like, okay, well, why don't you stop your stream? And it was, again, because, oh, man, if I stop my stream, then people aren't going to be able to find it, or we might have a couple people that are sick that need it. Yeah. So there was a tension that arose where they would realize, I want them in my room, but also I'm afraid to give this up. And also, like, I want it available for people, like a shut-ins, or like I want it to be able to be accessible for others. So it's like a tension point that wasn't wrestled through. So my encouragement was for the church leadership and pastors to get comfortable with whatever answer there is for that, to work that through. And then from there, tactically, how much budget are you putting behind it? Like how much effort are you going to put to the online service? And then again, there's a lot of tactical stuff where, while it's streaming, make sure to look at the camera and make sure to talk about, hi, those of you that are online and all that, like that can help. Interestingly, most of the people I talked to didn't really care about that. There's a certain amount of like, they understand they're at home and they're watching a video of the service. Like you're not like tricking people into like, oh, we're engaging you. So like they're aware of that. So that's a helpful thought, because, as I was the experienced pastor and stuff, we were real big on all the language that we had and looking into the camera. We had multiple venues at our church and things like that. So like the camera was very important. And it was kind of interesting to hear a number of people be like, yeah, no, I get that I'm watching a service. That's fine. Like it doesn't bother me if they don't say, hello, those of you online. Like that doesn't break that for them.
Interesting.
So that's kind of in a little bit of a nutshell, what I kind of landed on the online stuff. It's still very kind of nebulous. There's not like a hard and fast answer, it feels like.
Yeah, well, and I know it's subjective, right, to each church and their vision and their mission and you know, all of that. And I think a lot of the churches that I've worked with at the heart, I mean, they want people in person, right? Like we want to see them in person. But it's that tension that we wrestle with, like you say. And I think, you know, what you're saying is, like, I agree completely. We just need to understand the why behind it. Like, we got to ask the questions. And like you said, that scripture in Hebrews, like, okay, what does that mean to us? Don't neglect the gathering. But like, how does that look for us? And what does that mean about our online? And that allows us, when we know our firm why, it allows us to, you know, walk forward confidently. And if that means we're not going to do online anymore, then okay, we're going to be confident in it. But if we are going to do online, you know, it gives us a filter to run things through.
Yeah, there was one fascinating, which I quote this all the time. One of the participants, one of the like at-home participants in the study, made a quote. I don't remember what page it is. Anyway, you go to my dissertation, read the thing if you want. You don't have to. I totally understand. Like as you're listening, if you want to. But one of the things they said is, what's the difference? We were talking about like belonging and being known by the people that are at your church. And he says, what's the difference of me just watching online and being just somebody in a room of, you know, 800 people? I'm as little known there as I am online. Wow. And that was like fascinating to me because they're right. And so, I didn't get into every time I brought that to a pastor and kind of like, what do you think about that? They're like, yeah, no, they're right. So it's an interesting, like, we're talking about online, but it's also bigger churches, you know, and I guess maybe even when you get past 50 or 100, like it kind of becomes a problem to know people like that. But it's enough of a, one of the values a lot of the people were missing online was just to be known and to feel like they were a part. They're very much a observer when you're watching online. You're not really engaged, and I guess you could leave a comment and put emojis and hands up and all that, like, but that's not really being known. But then on the other side, if you're in a big room, who's just like, the best you're going to get is probably a handshake from a greeter on the way in, if you're lucky. Right. You might not see the pastor unless you go try to catch him after service or something like that. But yeah, you're just about as unknown there too. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it's thought-provoking for us, and I think it should cause all of us pause, you know, to say like, okay, so what are we going to do with that? If that's, you know, representative, if that person is representative of people in our churches and how they're actually feeling about whether it's online or in person, okay, what are we going to do about that? And I would imagine that's a conversation you're having with your students and the people that you mentor as well. Is like, hey, this is what you're walking into. So what are you going to do about that, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to be aware. Again, you have to wrestle scripturally, you know, theologically, contextually. Like, what does it mean for my church? What am I doing? Again, there's that big church. I wish I knew the name because that'd be really cool to know the name off the top of my head. But there's some churches that are like, okay, we're not going to stream. Meanwhile, there's other churches that are like, no, we're going full bore. We love the stream. You're a part of our, you know, church wherever you are. And they'll build systems to even start small groups and things like that based on locations of streams. And again, wrestling through what does that mean for my local church context and deciding on that and being comfortable with it. I think at the end of the day, like, the weekends are relentless. They happen every 7 days. So we don't really take time to get up and think, like, get our head up above the rest of it and think about it. But that's the big one I say is, like, as best as you can, try to wrestle your pastor down to some sort of like decision on it, which again is hard. I'm saying, like, as I'm saying this, I don't know. I wish there was a silver bullet for doing ministry, but there's not. It's so different for each and every one of our churches.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the challenge, but it's also the beauty of the body of Christ, right? Like every church is different and unique, and God has called them for a unique purpose. And I think that's just, that's incredible and such an encouraging thing as well, right? That we're not all meant to be exactly the same. But you know, I've loved everything that you've brought to us today. And I think we've gotten a lot of really valuable questions to ask ourselves, which is so great. And I imagine the students in your programs and all of that are asking these questions too. And so they're going to emerge stronger, more grounded, healthy, ready leaders, which is exciting to me. And so I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Is there anything else before we wrap up that you would say? Like, is there something that, you know, at the end of every class or the end of every, like, this is the thing, like, I need everybody to know this, or this is what God has put on my heart? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's always that God is, when we started conferences with the Church Collective, it was like 2015 or so. We called them the identity conferences, which was basically God's more concerned about who you are than what you do. And that's genuinely, we all agree with it intellectually, but we don't functionally act like it. So it's just a constant, like, you just have to guard yourself, guard your time with the Lord, whatever that exactly looks like. Maybe it's not always the morning in a special place with a cup of coffee, or like it doesn't have to always be exactly, you know, how like it looks on Instagram for a time, but like you have to tend to your heart with the Lord. Yeah. You have to be authentic to yourself. That's something, like, especially in church work, it's hard because your spirituality gets tied into your paycheck, and sometimes there'll be a compromise. Again, like we were talking about earlier in the chat, like when you want that job, and you might compromise on some things that you disagree with theologically or practically at the church, but you just want the job. So you get the job and you end up being in trouble. I've talked with guys with that for sure, where it's like, whoops, like, I don't agree with this. And it's like, well, why did you decide to go there? So integrity in that, it's hard, but like trusting that God's going to guide you where you need to go. It's far better to be authentic to yourself and to maintain. Again, that doesn't mean you get to just do whatever you want. Like, there's going to be time where you need to submit, and time where you need to learn, and time where you need to like realize that you don't know everything. But you need to be confident in who you are with the Lord, and you need to be confident in what it means for you to do ministry, and make sure as best as you can that you align that with wherever you end up being. Because that can get you in trouble when you try to please people, and you. I remember hanging out with a great mentor when I was first starting, was telling me, you know, I don't think, like, he coached a bunch of worship leaders, and he would say, like, most of the worship leaders, I bet they only read their Bibles like once or twice a month. And I was like, that's crazy. How could that possibly be? But now, like, this far in, it's like, yeah, no, he's probably right. That we tend to do all the work of the ministry, and we kind of equate that to our relationship with the Lord. You know, I opened my Bible and I found a passage to be able to, you know, transition from song to song. Yeah. And I treat that to like, there's my Bible time. And it's like, nah, it's okay. It's the Bible. But if that's my only diet of relationship, of prayer, it's all for my job. We've got to be careful that we're not turning that into my entire relationship, because then I'm dry. Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. That's such a good word. Well, thank you for sharing that and for giving that encouragement to us, because it is so needed. I think it always has been, but it feels like now more than ever, right? Like, we need to make sure that we're paying attention and tending to our hearts, like you said. Yeah. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. Where can people get in touch with you? How can they connect with you? Because I'd love to share all that information for our listeners. Yeah, sure. I mean, the best place is probably Instagram at this point. Find us. I'm at Ryan Loche, and or at the Church Collective, and then you can kind of get into all of our. We do training and conferences and all that. So you can get into that ecosystem over there, and awesome. we're here to serve. But yeah, usually I just tell people go over to Instagram, shoot a DM, because it's one thing to follow, but shoot me a DM. Love to have a conversation with you if you're listening. Yeah. Awesome. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and to bless our listeners. We appreciate it very much. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, that's it for another episode of the Overflow Worship Podcast. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being on this journey with us. Just remember that we are here for you. We're praying for you, and we really want to see you thrive in the ministry that God's called you to. And I just love that I get to talk with people like Ryan from all over the place whose hearts are for the church. So just know there's people rooting for you. There's people caring for you. And until next time, guys, keep on thriving.